The frost came early to Ashbourne that year, but nothing was colder than her mother's voice. You will not embarrass this family any longer. Victoria Hale stood in the drawing room she had been raised in, watching her father refuse to meet her eyes. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of doctors, of teas, of prayers whispered into pillows, 3 years and not one child to show for it. Barren, her mother said the word like a verdict. That is what they call you now, Victoria. And it is what you are. Her trunk was already packed. They had decided before she'd even been called downstairs. Where am I to go? Victoria asked. Nobody answered. Her father finally looked up. Anywhere that isn't here. The carriage that took her away wasn't even theirs. Borrowed from a neighbour, ashamed to be seen lending it. Or Victoria pressed her gloved hands together in her lap and didn't cry. She had cried enough in 3 years to fill the Thames. By the time she reached the gates of London, the story had already outrun her. Lady Ashbourne's daughter, set aside, unable to give her husband an heir. Women who had once curtsied to her now crossed the street rather than nod. At Lady Pemberton's card party, the room actually went quiet when her name was spoken. And then the laughter started, low and cruel, the kind that didn't need words to wound. Poor creature, someone murmured behind a fan. Cursed, they say. Some women simply aren't built for it. Worse came within the fortnight. Her former husband, Edmund, married again before the ink dried on the annulment papers. The new bride was 18, rosy-cheeked, and already, by every account whispered in every parlour in London, with child. A real wife, Edmund's mother declared at the wedding breakfast, loud enough to carry. Not like the last one. Victoria heard it from the street, standing outside in the rain because she had nowhere left to be invited. She was no longer a daughter, no longer a wife. She was a cautionary tale, a name mothers used to frighten daughters who didn't want to marry quickly enough. Don't end up like the Hale girl. She took a room above a milliner's shop, paid for with the last of her jewellery, and sat by a window that didn't quite keep out the cold. Outside, London moved on without her. Carriages, laughter, lives being lived. Inside, Victoria Hale, 24 years old, learned what it felt like to be erased while still breathing, for she did not know that 3 streets away, a duke had just buried his wife for the 2nd time that decade. This one taken not by childbirth, but grief itself, and was sitting alone in a house full of 5 children who no longer spoke to anyone at all. She did not know he had heard her name already. The knock came on a Tuesday, when Victoria had stopped expecting anyone to knock at all. The landlady's voice carried up the stairwell, tight with disbelief. "Miss Hale, there's a footman here. Says he's come from Lockwood House." Victoria's hands stilled over her needlework. Lockwood House. Even she, fallen as far as she'd fallen, knew that name. The Duke of Lockwood, widower twice over. 5 children. A man who hadn't been seen at a single social function in 2 years. She opened the door to find a liveried footman holding a sealed letter, his expression carefully blank, the kind of blank that meant he'd been told not to ask questions either. "His Grace requests the pleasure of your company. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. He sends his carriage." There must be some mistake. "There is no mistake, Miss Hale." She turned the letter over twice before opening it. The script inside was plain, almost terse. "Miss Hale, I have a proposal that will interest you. Come and hear it before you refuse it. V. Lockwood." She didn't sleep that night. Not from hope. She'd buried hope weeks ago. But from the sheer, gnawing strangeness of it. Why would a duke send for her? Unless it was cruelty dressed as charity, unless he simply wanted to see the scandal up close, like a curiosity in a glass case. She went anyway. Now she had nothing left to protect. Lockwood House was colder than its reputation. Grand, yes. Marble floors, a staircase that could have swallowed her old townhouse whole, but quiet in a way that felt wrong. No laughter echoing from nurseries, no running footsteps. A house holding its breath. The Duke received her in his study, standing by the window with his back half turned, as if he hadn't quite decided whether to face her. Miss Hale. He turned. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, but there was nothing young left in his eyes. Thank you for coming. Your letter left me little choice, Your Grace. Curiosity is a powerful thing. The faintest curve touched his mouth. Not quite a smile. Then let me satisfy it. I am asking you to marry me. Victoria sat very still. Now, forgive me, I think you misunderstand my circumstances. I am the woman London is currently amusing itself by destroying. I cannot give you an heir. I have 5 children, Miss Hale. I require no more heirs. Then what do you require? He didn't answer right away. He moved to his desk instead, turned a paperweight in his fingers like he needed something to hold. A mother for my children who will not abandon them. That is all. Surely half of London's eligible women would offer that more willingly than a woman everyone already calls cursed. They would offer it for my title, for Lockwood House, for the inheritance that comes attached to my name. His eyes lifted to hers, and for a moment something raw moved behind them. You have no reason to want any of that. You've already lost everything society can take, which means you're the only woman in London who might actually stay for the right reason. And what reason is that? The children, not me. Victoria studied him, the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands wouldn't quite stay still, the grief that sat on him like a coat he hadn't taken off in years. There was something he wasn't saying. She could feel the shape of it, even if she couldn't name it. Why me, specifically? You could have chosen anyone. Because you understand what it is to be discarded for something you couldn't control. His voice dropped, quieter now. My children have been discarded too, not by blood, by everyone who was supposed to stay. It wasn't romance, it wasn't even kindness exactly. It was something closer to recognition, one ruined thing reaching toward another. You don't know me, Your Grace. No, and you don't know me. But I watched what they did to you outside that wedding breakfast, Miss Hale. I watched, and I did nothing, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. So he had seen her, in the rain, invisible to everyone else, and he had seen her. I'll give you 3 days to consider it, he said, turning back to the window, already retreating behind whatever wall he lived behind. After that, I won't ask again. Victoria left Lockwood House with more questions than she'd arrived with, and the strange, unsettling sense that the answers mattered more than her pride. She said yes on the 3rd day, because 3 days was exactly long enough to realize she had nothing else. The wedding was small, quiet, almost furtive, a special license, a near-empty chapel, no flowers because Vincent said flowers felt like a lie. Till Victoria signed her name and became a duchess in under 10 minutes, and felt less married than she had the first time, when at least there had been hope in the room. Lockwood House didn't celebrate. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pruitt, met her at the door with a curtsy so shallow it barely qualified. Your Grace. The title came out like an accusation. I understand the staff may have questions, Victoria said. We have none, Your Grace. Only instructions. Mrs. Pruitt's eyes flicked over her travelling dress, 3 seasons old, carefully mended at the cuff. His Grace's late wife wore Worth, but I'm sure we'll manage. The steward, Mr. Crewe, was worse. He cornered her on her second day, ledgers tucked under his arm like a shield. I manage the estate accounts, Your Grace. All of them. His Grace trusts me entirely. A pause, deliberate. I'd advise you not to involve yourself in matters you weren't raised to understand. I was raised in a house with accounts, Mr. Crewe. A house that sold you off when you proved unprofitable. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed of saying it. Forgive my bluntness. I simply want to know what I'm dealing with. She held his gaze until he looked away first. It was a small victory. It didn't feel like one. The children were the wall she hadn't braced for. Edward, 16 and already taller than his father, wouldn't look at her at all. He passed her in the hallway like she was furniture that had been moved without his permission. The twins, Charlotte and Beatrice, 11, were polite in the way that was its own kind of cruelty. Perfect curtsies, perfect silence, eyes that said, "We have buried 2 mothers, and we will not bury our hearts for a third." Henry, 9, simply stayed in his room. And the youngest, Thomas, 6 years old and small for his age, looked at her from behind the nursery door with an expression Victoria couldn't read. Not hostility, exactly. Something closer to fear of hoping. At dinner the first week, Edward set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Father didn't ask us before he married you." "Edward," Vincent's voice carried warning. "It's a fair question." Edward didn't flinch. "We've had a nurse leave, a governess leave. We don't need another woman who'll be gone in a year." "I'm not leaving," Victoria said. That's what the last one said too. He pushed back from the table and walked out, and no one stopped him. Then came the Dowager Duchess, or Vincent's mother arrived unannounced on the 10th day, swept into the drawing room in black bombazine, and looked at Victoria the way one might examine a stain on good linen. "So this is the creature my son has saddled himself with." "Mother." "Don't mother me, Vincent. I have buried 2 daughters by marriage and watched you grieve them properly. This one," she gestured at Victoria without looking at her directly, "comes with a scandal attached like a smell that won't wash out. She is my wife. She is a barren woman from a disgraced family, married for convenience, and everyone in London knows it." The Dowager finally turned her full gaze on Victoria. "I will not pretend otherwise for your comfort. You are not wanted here. You are merely tolerated, because my son has made a decision I cannot undo. But don't mistake one for the other." Victoria kept her spine straight. "I didn't come here for your approval, your grace." "No." The Dowager's mouth twisted, almost admiring, almost contemptuous. "You came here because you had nowhere else to go. Don't dress it up as anything braver than that." She left without another word, and the silence she left behind was heavier than her voice had been. That night, Victoria stood at her bedroom window, a different room than Vincent's, a separate wing entirely, a marriage in name only, and watched the gardens go dark below, a house full of people, and not one of them hers. She thought of her father's voice, "Anywhere that isn't here." She had travelled so far, married so strangely, and still ended up exactly where she started, unwanted, in someone else's house, waiting for the next person to tell her to leave. She didn't cry. She was almost proud of that. But somewhere down the corridor, behind a door left a few inches open, a small voice was crying instead. And Victoria found she couldn't quite walk past it. The crying came from Thomas's room. Victoria almost turned away. almost remembered Mrs. Pruitt's warning look, Edward's cold shoulder, the dowager's voice still ringing in her ears. But the sound was small and frightened in a way that didn't care about any of that. She pushed the door open gently. Thomas. He was curled at the foot of his bed. Not in it, knees to his chest, cheeks flushed an unhealthy red. When he saw her, he flinched, then seemed to remember he was too tired to be afraid. "My head hurts," he whispered. "And I'm cold, but I'm hot too." "Oh, that doesn't make sense." Victoria crossed the room and pressed her hand to his forehead before she'd even decided to. "Burning. How long have you felt like this?" "Since this morning. I didn't tell anyone." His eyes were glassy, too bright. "Nobody comes when I call anymore." Something in her chest cracked clean through. "I'm here now." She rang for Mrs. Pruitt, who took one look at Thomas and went pale beneath her starch. "I'll send for the physician, Your Grace, but he's 2 hours out at this time of night. The roads." "Then we don't wait for him." Victoria was already moving. "I need cool water, vinegar if you have it, and clean linen. Now, please." Mrs. Pruitt hesitated half a second, old loyalty warring with old suspicion, then went. Vincent arrived as Victoria was wringing out the first cloth. He stood in the doorway, jaw tight, the particular stillness of a man who had stood in this exact spot before and lost. "Is he?" "Fever. High, but his pulse is steady." "I've seen this before, Vincent. My old governess took ill the same way every winter. It breaks if we keep him cool and keep fluids in him." She didn't look up from Thomas. "I need you to trust me for the next several hours." He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. He sat in the corner chair and watched, hands clenched between his knees while Victoria worked. The night went long and ugly. Thomas's fever climbed before it broke. He shivered, then burned, then mumbled half words that weren't sentences. Victoria didn't stop. Cool cloth to his forehead, water to his lips, her voice low and steady even when her hands weren't. "You're not going anywhere," she told him, more than once, or the same words she'd once needed someone to say to her. "I'm not leaving this room." Near 3 a.m, Thomas's breathing finally evened. The flush in his cheeks dimmed to something almost normal. Victoria sat back on her heels, exhausted, and found Vincent watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Something between disbelief and a grief he hadn't expected to feel that night. "He's past the worst of it," she said. "You don't know that." "I do. I've sat through enough fevers to know the difference." He said nothing else, but he didn't go to bed either. He stayed in that chair until dawn, and so did she, and neither of them spoke of why. Thomas woke at first light, weak but clear-eyed, and looked up to find Victoria still there, hair loose, dress creased, eyes red with no sleep. "You stayed," he said, wondering, as like it was a fact he needed to test out loud. "I said I would." He reached for her hand, small fingers closing around hers with a grip stronger than his size suggested. "Mama." The word landed in the room like something breaking open. Victoria's breath caught. Across the room, Vincent went very still. "You don't have to call me that," Victoria managed. "I know." Thomas didn't let go of her hand. "I want to." It didn't spread to the others. If anything, it made things worse. Edward heard about it from a maid before breakfast and said nothing, but his silence at the table had a new edge to it, something closer to betrayal than indifference. "He's 6, Edward said finally, not looking up from his plate. "He doesn't remember enough to know better." "Edward," Vincent started. "I'm not arguing, Father. I'm explaining." He pushed back his chair. The rest of us remember exactly how this goes. Charlotte and Beatrice exchanged a glance and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. Henry didn't even come down to breakfast. But upstairs, in a small room with a damp cloth still folded on the nightstand, one small boy had decided, against every signal the house was sending him, that Victoria was staying. And Victoria, sitting at that breakfast table, surrounded by 4 children who would not look at her, found she finally had something to hold on to. One thread, one small, fierce hand that hadn't let go. It would have to be enough for now to build on. Thomas's recovery should have softened the house. Instead, it seemed to harden everyone else. Edward took to disappearing for hours, not returning smelling of brandy, though he was only 16. When Victoria tried to speak to him about it, he cut her off before she'd finished the sentence. "You don't get to parent me," he said. "You weren't here for the parts that mattered. You don't get the easy parts now. Edward, I only want... I know what you want. Thomas's whole heart. Easy. Because he's 6 and doesn't remember enough to protect himself. His eyes were hard, older than they should have been. I remember everything. I remember my mother, and the one after her. I'm not handing you anything." He left before she could answer. She didn't chase him. She was learning, slowly, which battles could be won by patience, and which only deepened by pushing. The relatives came next, circling like they'd smelled something. Vincent's cousin, Mr. Reginald Ashby, has arrived under the pretense of a social call and stayed long enough to corner Victoria in the library. You understand, of course, that the children's inheritances are entailed quite specifically, he said, turning a glass of Vincent's brandy in his hand he hadn't been offered. Should anything happen to Vincent before the boys come of age, the estate's management would fall to a trustee. Myself, as it happens. Why are you telling me this, Mr. Ashby? Merely so you understand your position clearly. You're not their mother. Not by blood, not by law beyond a signature. If you're hoping to secure yourself a comfortable widow's portion, I'm not hoping for anything but their well-being. He smiled like he didn't believe a word of it. How fortunate, then, that it costs you nothing to say so. She told Vincent that night. His jaw tightened in a way she was beginning to recognize. Ashby's wanted control of this estate since before my first wife died. Ignore him. He's not wrong that I have no real claim here. Vincent. You have my name. He said it simply, like it settled something. It didn't. Not entirely. But it was the first time he'd said anything that sounded like he meant to keep her. The rumors arrived through Charlotte and Beatrice's governess, who heard them at a tea and repeated them at supper without thinking, the way servants and children sometimes did. They're saying in town, the governess offered, oblivious to the room going quiet, that her grace trapped his grace into marriage, that she claimed to be with child to secure the match, then lost it conveniently once the ring was on. Victoria set down her fork. Or that's not true. Of course not, Your Grace, the governess said, too quickly, already realizing her mistake. But the twins were staring now, something calculating behind their matching faces, and Victoria understood the rumor had already done its damage, not because anyone truly believed it, but because it gave the children one more reason to keep their distance. Then Edmund came back. He arrived at Lockwood House on a Sunday, uninvited, his new wife absent, his expression carrying the particular confidence of a man who believed himself owed an audience. Victoria, you look well, surprising given the circumstances. What do you want, Edmund? To extend my congratulations, a duke no less. Quite the improvement from being cast off. His eyes swept the hall with open envy. Though I imagine it's lonely, what being married for your usefulness rather than your heart. I know that particular arrangement rather well. You proposed that arrangement first, and you're living in a bigger house because of it. He smiled, thin and humorless. I only came to say, should this collapse, as I suspect it will, you needn't think there's anywhere left to fall but further. Vincent's voice came from the stairwell, cold and final. I think you've said quite enough, Mr. Hale. Edmund, startled, hadn't realized he was being watched. He left without another word, but the visit lingered in the house, like smoke that wouldn't clear. That night, Victoria stood in the nursery doorway and watched Thomas sleep, his small hand still curled around the wooden horse she'd mended for him. One ally. One small, fragile foothold in a house full of people who wanted her gone. Edward's resentment, Ashby's greed, the rumours, Edmund's cruelty, all of it pressing in at once. She thought of leaving. The thought arrived and left quickly, unwelcome. She had been pushed out of one family already. She would not be pushed out of this one without a fight, even if, for now, the only soldier on her side was 6 years old and didn't yet know what a war looked like. The letter from her parents arrived first, and it should have surprised her less than it did. Victoria, we have heard of your marriage and wish to reconcile. A duchess in the family changes things. Your father has business interests that would benefit from connection to Lockwood. We trust you will not hold the past against us. Mother, no apology. Not one word of it. Just an invitation back into a family that had only ever wanted her when she was useful. Victoria read it twice, then set it down with hands that didn't shake nearly as much as she expected. The second visitor was harder to dismiss. Lord Camden was a widower, kind-eyed, nearer 50 than 40, with 3 grown daughters and a reputation for decency that even London's gossips couldn't dent. He called on Lockwood House under the guise of business with Vincent, but found a moment alone with Victoria in the garden, and didn't waste it. Forgive my directness, Your Grace. I know your marriage was arranged, practical. I've heard enough whispers to understand it isn't a love match. He paused, choosing his words with care. I have admired you since before your scandal. I admire you more since. If circumstances were ever different, though an annulment is not unheard of in a marriage so new and so plainly one of convenience, I could offer you a home built on rather more than usefulness. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. 3 months ago, this offer would have been salvation. You're a good man, Lord Camden. That sounds like the beginning of a refusal. It is. She said it gently, but without hesitation. I have 5 children in that house who are only just beginning to let me stay. I won't undo that for comfort. Even children who aren't yours by blood? They're mine by every measure that matters to me now. He studied her, something like respect settling over the disappointment in his face. Then I hope the Duke knows what he has. Vincent found her afterward, staring at nothing in the corridor outside Thomas's room. Crewe told me Camden called. His voice was careful, unreadable. And your mother's letter. Pruitt mentioned it arrived. You've had quite a busy afternoon of gossip, Your Grace. Victoria. He stepped closer. If you wanted to go, to either of them, to anywhere, I wouldn't stop you. This marriage was never meant to be a cage. I told you that the day I asked. It would have been easy, in that moment, to mistake the offer for kindness. She understood suddenly that it was something closer to fear, a man so used to people leaving that he'd rather release her first than watch her go. Is that what you want? For me to leave? No. The word came out rougher than he intended. No, that is emphatically not what I want. Then stop offering me the door, Vincent. I'm not looking for it. He didn't answer right away, and something in his face shifted. Surprise, maybe, that anyone would choose to stay in this house full of grief and resentment when they didn't have to. Why? He asked finally. Camden could give you an easy life. Your family could give you a name with no scandal attached to it. I can offer you neither. You're not offering me a life, Vincent. You're offering me a family that needs one. She glanced toward Thomas's door, then down the hall toward Edward's, shut tight as it had been for weeks. I know what it is to be discarded for something I couldn't control. I'm not doing that to them. Not for an easier offer. Not for anyone. She wrote back to her mother that evening. 3 lines, no more. I have a family now. It is not the one you sold. I will not be returning to either. She sealed it without rereading it, and felt lighter than she had in months. Edward saw her in the hallway afterward, the letter to the footman already gone, posted before she could reconsider, and for once didn't walk past her without a word. Lord Camden called for you, he said, not quite a question. He did. And I sent him away. Edward studied her face like he was looking for the lie in it, and couldn't find one. He didn't say anything else, but for the first time, he didn't look away from her either, just held her gaze a half-second longer than he needed to, like he was recalculating something he'd been certain of. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the first crack in a wall that had been solid for months, and Victoria, exhausted and certain in a way she hadn't been certain of anything in years, decided that was enough to build on. But the invitation came from Lady Pemberton, the same woman whose card party had once gone silent at the sound of Victoria's name. A ball, in honour of the Duke and Duchess of Lockwood, which everyone understood to mean, bring your worst manners and your best dresses and watch the scandal try to survive a room. Vincent wanted to decline. Victoria insisted they go. They'll talk regardless, she said, fastening her gloves. I'd rather they talk while watching us stand together than while imagining us hiding. He looked at her a long moment, something like pride breaking through the careful distance he still kept. You've gotten braver since Ashridge sold you off in a marketplace of opinions. I had to. Nobody else was going to be brave for me. The ballroom was lit gold, all full of the same faces that had once turned away from her in the street. Victoria felt their eyes the moment she entered, assessing, hungry, waiting to see if the rumour of the trapped Duke and his desperate Duchess held up under candlelight. It held for almost an hour. Then the Dowager Duchess's sister-in-law, 3 glasses of wine into the evening, decided the silence wasn't loud enough. I do wonder, she said, pitched to Carrie, how it feels to raise 5 children who aren't yours, knowing you'll never give the Duke one who is. Rather like decorating a house you don't actually own. The room's chatter dimmed, scenting blood. Victoria opened her mouth, and then a small voice cut through before she could. She is our mother. Thomas, 7 years old, chin up, plainly terrified and refusing to show it, standing in the middle of a ballroom full of adults who could have crushed him with a glance. The room actually went quiet. That's enough, child, the woman started. She stayed up all night when I had a fever. His voice cracked but didn't stop. Nobody else did that, not ever. A beat of stunned silence, and then, from beside him, Charlotte's voice, steadier. She's right, she's our mother. Beatrice, a half step behind her twin, nodded once, fierce. She didn't have to choose us. She did anyway. Henry, who had barely spoken to Victoria in 3 months, who Victoria had assumed resented her as quietly and completely as his silence suggested, stepped forward too, his voice smaller but no less certain. She remembers what I like at breakfast. My own. He stopped himself, swallowed. She remembers. Sure, that's what mothers do. 4 voices now, in a room gone utterly still. Every aristocrat in London, watching a scandal, refused to behave like one. Victoria's eyes had filled without her permission. She didn't dare look at Vincent. She didn't dare look at anyone but the woman who'd started this, who now stood frozen, fan half raised, with no clever thing left to say. Then Edward moved. He had been standing near the doorway, arms crossed, the way he always stood, half in the room, half ready to leave it. Victoria watched him cross the floor, and for one terrible second, she thought he meant to walk past, to refuse, to be the one voice that didn't come. He stopped in front of her, instead. I told her she'd be gone in a year, he said, loud enough for the room, not looking away from Victoria's face. As I was wrong. He turned to the room at large, his jaw tight, his eyes bright in a way 16-year-old boys weren't supposed to allow in public. She is our mother. She chose to stay when she didn't have to. That's worth more than blood. Victoria's composure broke entirely. She didn't manage words. She simply reached for him. And Edward, proud, guarded, furious Edward, let himself be held in the middle of a ballroom full of people who'd spent months calling her cursed. One by one, the others gathered around her, too, Thomas's arms around her waist, the twins on either side. Henry pressed close, finally unafraid to be seen wanting comfort. 5 children. 1 scandal-soaked duchess. A room full of witnesses who had come to watch her fail. Vincent crossed the floor and stood at the edge of it, while watching his children hold on to a woman he had married for convenience, and somehow, without either of them quite noticing when, had stopped being convenient at all. The woman with the wine glass set it down quietly and left without another word. Nobody stopped her. Nobody needed to. Lady Pemberton, to her credit, simply signalled the orchestra to begin again, as if announcing, let them have their moment. Victoria, surrounded by 5 children who had finally, fiercely claimed her, wept openly in the middle of the ballroom that had once destroyed her and didn't care who saw. By morning, the story had already outrun the ballroom. Servants carried it to kitchens, kitchens carried it to markets, markets carried it to drawing rooms across London. The Lockwood children called her mother in front of everyone. By the time it reached the breakfast tables of the people who'd once delighted in Victoria's ruin, it had grown into something almost unbearable to them. Proof that the woman they'd discarded had built from nothing exactly what they all pretended to value most. The Dowager Duchess arrived at Lockwood House before noon, which Victoria hadn't expected at all. She stood in the doorway of the morning room, black bombazine, as severe as ever, but something in her face had shifted overnight. I heard what happened at Pemberton's ball. It wasn't quite an apology. The Dowager didn't seem built for those. Edward hasn't called anyone mother since his own died. Not once. Not for the last one. Not for the one before that. I didn't ask him to. I know. The Dowager's mouth tightened, or something working behind her eyes that looked almost like discomfort at her own feelings. I said you were merely tolerated here. I find I was wrong about that. And I find I do not enjoy being wrong, Victoria. But I am not too proud to say it. It was the first time she'd used Victoria's name instead of creature or Your Grace spoken like an insult. It would have to do for now as an opening. Mr. Ashby's visit was less gracious. He arrived with his usual ledgers, his usual confidence, and found Vincent waiting for him with a different kind of stillness than before. "I understand the children made quite a public declaration," Ashby said, setting down his hat. "Charming, I'm sure. Sentiment doesn't change the legal position, however. The estate's entail is no longer your concern, Reginald." Vincent's voice was flat, final. "I've had my solicitors draw new provisions naming Victoria guardian of the children's interests, should anything happen to me before they come of age. You are removed from any future role in this family's affairs." Ashby's composure cracked just slightly. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that my children chose her in front of half of London, and you have spent 2 years circling this house, waiting for a tragedy to profit from. I find I no longer require your concern for my family's well-being." Vincent walked him to the door himself. "Good afternoon." Ashby left without his ledgers. Nobody fetched them after him. Edmund's reckoning came at the theatre, 3 weeks later, the kind of accidental collision London seemed designed to produce. He approached during the interval, his young wife trailing behind him, her condition now visibly advanced, her smile brittle in a way that suggested married life had not been the triumph she'd expected. "Victoria. Still playing Duchess, I see." "Still playing husband, I see," Victoria replied evenly. "How is that going for you?" Edmund's jaw tightened. Behind him, his wife's smile faltered further. She had clearly heard enough whispers by now to suspect her own bargain hadn't been the prize she'd been promised. "I heard about the spectacle at Pemberton's," Edmund said. "Children play-acting affection for an audience. Rather pathetic, wouldn't you say?" "They weren't play-acting, Edmund. That's the difference between what I have now and what you had with me. You never once had to wonder whether mine was real." It landed harder than she'd intended. Edmund had no answer for it. His wife's hand slipped quietly from his arm, and Victoria watched something small and important crack open between them. The first crack in a marriage built on exactly the kind of performance Edmund had just accused her children of. Vincent appeared at her elbow before Edmund could recover his composure. "Mr. Hale, I trust you're enjoying the performance." A pointed glance toward Edmund's wife. "Both of them." They didn't stay for the second act. Victoria didn't need them to. Her parents wrote once more, after the ball, after the story had reached every corner of town. A longer letter this time, warmer, full of words like proud and always loved that hadn't existed in their vocabulary 3 months earlier. Victoria read it on the terrace, Thomas's head resting against her shoulder, and felt nothing but a quiet, settled kind of clarity. What she didn't write back, some doors didn't need slamming. They simply needed to stay closed. That evening, Vincent found her in the garden, watching the last of the light fade behind the hedges. "London stopped calling you cursed," he said. "I heard it twice today. The Duchess who saved that house. Quite a change in a season. It was never about changing their minds, Vincent." She turned to him, something steady and unshakable in her voice, now that hadn't been there the day she'd arrived. "I stopped needing them to approve of me the moment Thomas called me Mama for the first time. Everything since has just been them catching up." He looked at her like he was seeing the shape of something he hadn't let himself name yet, and didn't. Not that night. But he didn't look away either. Winter came gentler than the one before it. The house that had once held its breath now filled with noise. Thomas's laughter chasing down corridors. Edward home from university for the holidays, and actually staying in the drawing room instead of retreating from it. The twins arguing over ribbon colours with the kind of ordinary bickering that meant they finally felt safe enough to bicker at all. Victoria noticed it, the way one notices warmth returning to numb fingers. Slowly. Then all at once. She and Vincent had settled into something neither of them had named. Not the cold arrangement of the first months. Something closer to partnership. Shared glances across the dinner table, his hand finding hers without either of them remarking on it. Evenings spent in the same room, not because duty required it, but because neither wanted to be elsewhere. "You've stopped offering me the door," she said one night, the fire low between them. "I noticed you stopped looking for it." He turned the brandy glass in his hand, not drinking it, just needing something to hold the way he always did before saying something true. "I used to think marriage was a transaction I'd already failed at twice. Buried 2 wives, Victoria. Told myself I wasn't capable of doing it properly a 3rd time, so I wouldn't try. And now? Now I find I've stopped thinking of it as a 3rd attempt at all." He set the glass down. "It feels like the first time I've actually done it right." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look between them said enough. The 12th night ball was Vincent's idea, which surprised everyone, including Victoria. He had avoided society events for 2 years before her arrival, and even after, had only attended Pemberton's ball because she'd insisted. "This one," he proposed himself. "I have something to say," he told her, "and I find I want witnesses this time." The ballroom filled with the same families who had once watched her ruin with appetite, then watched her redemption with reluctant awe. Victoria stood beside Vincent near the head of the room, 5 children arranged around them. Edward, tall and steady at one shoulder, the twins matching in blue, Henry solemn and proud, Thomas gripping her hand like he still half expected the moment to be taken from him. Vincent raised his glass, and the orchestra quieted, and the room turned toward him, the way rooms always turned toward dukes. 2 years ago, this house was silent, he said. 5 children who had learned not to hope for anyone staying. Was a father who had stopped believing he had anything left worth offering them. His eyes found Victoria's. "I am told that when I chose my wife, I chose her out of practicality, convenience, a solution to a problem rather than anything resembling love." A ripple of murmurs, old gossip, resurfacing. "I won't pretend that isn't how it began." His voice didn't waver. "But I find I no longer wish to be remembered for the choice I made out of necessity. I wish to be remembered for the choice I am making now, freely, with nothing forcing my hand." He turned fully to face her, and the room went still in the particular way it had at Pemberton's. The sense of something happening in front of people unused to witnessing anything real. "The greatest gift I ever gave my children was not a title, not an inheritance, or not anything this estate could provide them." His voice dropped, rough with something he'd clearly been holding back for longer than tonight. "It was her. I knew it the night Thomas called her Mama, and I had to leave the room so no one would see me weep. I have known it every day since, and I find I am done pretending I married her only for them." He took her hand. "I am asking you again, Victoria. Not for an arrangement. Not for a solution. I am asking because I love you, plainly and entirely, and I should like the chance to marry you properly, in my heart, this time, not merely on paper." The room that had once laughed at her now held its breath for her instead. Victoria, the woman London had called Barren and cursed and cast off, looked at the man who had chosen her twice, once out of desperation, or once out of love, and found she had no clever words left at all. "Yes," she said simply. "Again. Always." 5 children cheered before either adult could say another word, and the orchestra, taking its cue, began to play. 30 years is a long time to prove people wrong, and Victoria, Duchess of Lockwood, had used every year of it. Lockwood House no longer held its breath. It overflowed, with noise, with laughter, with the particular chaos of a family, too large and too loved to stay quiet for long. Edward inherited the title in his own time, married well, and raised 3 sons who called Victoria grandmama with the same fierce certainty their father had once refused her. He'd never forgotten the ballroom at Pemberton's. He told the story to his own children so often they could recite it before they understood why it mattered. Or Charlotte and Beatrice married within a year of each other, scattering across the county. But Christmas always brought them home, their own daughters trailing behind them, asking why the garden bench by the oak tree had a small brass plate on it that none of them had ever properly read. Henry became a physician. Because someone in this family should know how to look after a fever properly, he said, only half joking, and everyone understood exactly which fever he meant. Thomas never left at all. He built his own house on the edge of the estate, close enough to visit daily, and named his first daughter Victoria, though everyone simply called her Tory, and the original Victoria pretended not to cry the day she was born and failed entirely. Vincent grayed slowly, contentedly, the kind of aging that comes from a life finally settled instead of merely endured. He and Victoria took to walking the gardens every evening, a habit grown so old it had become its own kind of vow. "Do you remember," he asked her once, decades in, watching grandchildren chase each other across the lawn, "the day I told you I required no more heirs? I remember thinking you were either mad or honest. I couldn't decide which. Both, as it turned out." He took her hand the way he'd taken it that 12th night, all those years ago. "I built an entire family with a woman everyone told me couldn't give me one. Funny, what people understand about family and what they don't." She rested her head against his shoulder, and they watched the children. Their children could, however the bloodlines ran, fill the garden with noise neither of them had dared imagine. Once, in a house that used to be so quiet it ached, word reached London occasionally, in those years, of Edmund Hale's quiet decline. A marriage that had curdled into resentment, a wife who'd grown tired of being someone's proof rather than someone's choice, a man who'd spent his life chasing the appearance of having won, and lost anyway. Victoria heard the news without satisfaction and without sorrow. He simply stopped mattering to her, which was its own kind of victory, quieter than any she'd imagined in her angriest years. Her parents passed within a year of each other, properly reconciled by then, properly proud. Too late to matter much, but not too late for Victoria to attend both funerals with her children beside her, the proof that she had built something larger than the family that had once discarded her. When Victoria died, it was peacefully, in the house that had once rejected her so completely, surrounded by 5 children who were no less hers for the absence of blood between them, and grandchildren who had never once heard the word Barren attached to her name. Vincent followed less than a year later. The estate said he simply stopped wanting to stay anywhere she wasn't. They were buried together beneath the old oak in the garden, where the bench still stood, where Thomas had once handed her a wooden horse and asked if she was staying. Edward commissioned the headstone himself and refused every suggestion that wasn't his own. The Lockwood family motto sat above it, as tradition required. But beneath that, carved in plain script, there was the line he insisted on, the line that answered, finally and forever, the wound that had started this all in a cold drawing room 30 years before. She bore no child of her own, yet raised the hearts of generations. Travellers passing the estate still slow at the gates sometimes, drawn by gardens that have grown wild and abundant for 3 decades, tended now by hands that learned the craft from her. Locals tell newcomers the story without much prompting. The Duchess London, once called cursed, who became the reason an entire family learned how to stay, Nobody calls her Barren anymore. They call her Mother. If this story moved you, you know exactly what to do. Hit subscribe to Duke Tales, because we're not done finding women who were cast aside and the men who finally saw what everyone else missed. Drop a comment below. What part broke you the most? Was it Thomas saying "Mama" for the first time, or the children choosing her in that ballroom? And if you want more stories like this one, rejection, redemption, and a love that had to be earned, not given, turn on notifications because the next one drops soon. We'll see you in the next story.